The Academy's cruel hierarchies of pecking order, the Stellar Academy floated in the void like a crystal cathedral, its transparent aluminum walls offering breathtaking views of the star-scattered cosmos. Within its halls, the galaxy's brightest young minds gathered to learn, to grow, and unfortunately, to establish their own brutal social hierarchies. The station housed over 3,000 students from 47 different species, each bringing their own cultures, their own strengths, and their own prejudices. Zara Chen pressed her face against the cool observation deck window, watching a supply ship dock with practiced precision. The 18-year-old human had been at the Academy for 3 months now, and she still marveled at the sheer diversity surrounding her. Towering Gorvani with their rock-like skin and incredible strength. Ethereal wisps who seemed to phase in and out of visibility. The insectoid hive mind species who moved in perfect synchronization, and dozens of others, each remarkable in their own way. But Zara had learned something disturbing during her time here. Intelligence and potential meant nothing if you lacked physical power or family wealth. The Academy might preach equality and cooperation, but the students had their own rules. And at the top of that cruel pyramid sat the Gorvani, specifically one named Brutok. The predator and his prey Brutok stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body carved from what looked like living granite. His family owned the largest mining operation in the Andromeda sector, and he made sure everyone knew it. His voice could shake walls when he laughed, which he did often at others' expense. Today, like most days, he had found his favorite target. Lyrics huddled in the corner of the Academy's main cafeteria, her beautiful iridescent scales dulled by stress and humiliation. The young Catherian female was perhaps the most striking being Zara had ever seen, with scales that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on the light. Her people were known for their artistic abilities and peaceful nature, which made them perfect victims in Brutok's eyes. The Catherian homeworld had been devastated by a civil war 5 years ago, leaving millions refugees scattered across the galaxy. Lyrics had earned her spot at the Academy through pure academic brilliance, but her scholarship status made her vulnerable. She had no family wealth to protect her, no powerful connections to call upon. She was alone. Well, Brutok's voice boomed across the cafeteria, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn. If it isn't our little charity case. Tell me, Skelskin, did your people learn to eat trash during the war? Or is that a new skill you're developing here? Lyrics' scales shifted to a pale, sickly hue as she tried to make herself invisible. She clutched her meal tray closer, hoping to eat quickly and escape. But Brutok had other plans. The humiliation, the massive Gorvani approached with his usual entourage. 3 other Gorvani students, all from wealthy families, all eager to please their leader. Behind them trailed a few students from other species, those who had learned that joining Brutok was safer than opposing him. They formed a semicircle around Lyrics' table, blocking any escape routes. You know what I heard? Brutok continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a whisper, but still carried across the cafeteria. I heard Catherians can absorb nutrients through their skin. That true, charity girl? Lyrics said nothing, her scales now almost white with fear. Zara watched from across the room, her hands clenching into fists. She had seen this pattern before. Brutok would escalate until he got a reaction, and then he would claim the victim had started it. I'm talking to you. Brutok slammed his massive fist on the table, causing Lyrics' food to jump and scatter. The sound echoed like a gunshot. When your betters speak, you answer. I just want to eat, Lyrics whispered, her voice barely audible even in the now silent cafeteria. Brutark laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Oh, you want to eat? Well, why didn't you say so? With deliberate malice, he swept his arm across the table, sending Lyrics's food flying across the floor. The carefully prepared meals scattered in all directions, landing in puddles and sticking to the walls. There's your food, charity case. Bon appetite. The cafeteria held its collective breath. This had gone too far, even by Brutark's standards. But nobody moved. The wisp students faded further into translucency, making themselves invisible. The insectoid collectors huddled together, their antennae twitching with distress. Even the proud Stellar Confederation representatives looked away. Everyone knew the rules. Don't get involved. Don't make yourself a target. Survive your time at the academy and move on. Everyone except Zara, the human variables, stood up from her table slowly, deliberately. The movement seemed to draw every eye in the room. At 5 feet 6 inches, she was dwarfed by most species in the academy. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her standard-issue academy uniform marked her as unremarkable. She had no impressive physical features, no technological augmentations, no family crests indicating wealth or power. She was, by galactic standards, completely ordinary. Sit down. Human, Brutark called out, not even bothering to look at her. This doesn't concern your kind. But Zara was already moving. She walked with a purposeful stride toward the confrontation, her boots clicking against the metal flooring with mechanical precision. Something in her posture, in the set of her shoulders, made nearby students step back instinctively. Hold my juice, she said quietly to a passing wisp student, handing off her drink. The phrase made no cultural sense to most of the aliens present, but the tone was universally understood. It was the sound of someone preparing for violence. Brutark finally turned to face her, his rocky features twisting into a sneer. What did you say to me, little human? I said, Zara replied, her voice carrying clearly through the silent cafeteria. You're going to pick up that food. The laughter that erupted from Brutark and his gang was like an avalanche. The idea that this small human female could threaten them was apparently the funniest thing they had ever heard. Several other species joined in, not understanding the joke, but wanting to be on the winning side. Or what? Brutark asked, wiping tears of laughter from his rock-like eyes. You'll make me. Zara's response was simple and direct. Yeah, I will. The art of war, what happened next, would be discussed in academy halls for years to come. Brutark, still chuckling at what he saw as a pathetic display, reached out to shove the impudent human aside. His massive hand, easily capable of crushing a human skull, moved toward Zara with casual contempt. It never reached her. Zara moved like liquid lightning, her body flowing around Brutark's attack with practiced ease. She grabbed his extended arm, planted her feet, and used the Gorvani's own massive weight and momentum against him. The technique was called a hip throw on Earth, refined over thousands of years of human martial arts development. The result was spectacular. Brutark found himself airborne, his 8-foot frame describing a perfect arc through the cafeteria air before crashing down onto his own scattered mess of food. The impact shook the entire deck, and the sound was like a controlled demolition. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The most feared bully in the academy lay stunned in a pile of spilled food, defeated by a human who weighed less than one of his arms. Zara stood over him, completely relaxed, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. "Funny thing about humans," she said conversationally to the stunned audience. "We're not the biggest predator on our planet. We're not the fastest, or the strongest, or the most venomous. You know what we are." She looked around the room, making eye contact with students from dozens of species. "We're the ones who survived anyway, and we did it by being smarter, more adaptably, and more stubborn than everything that tried to eat us." Brutok tried to rise, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. But Zara was already there, applying what humans called a joint lock to his massive arm. The leverage was perfect, and physics cared nothing for species or size. "Now," she continued pleasantly, "you're going to apologize to Lyrics. Then you're going to clean up this mess. Then you're going to leave her alone. Forever." "You don't know who I am," Brutok growled through gritted teeth. "My family owns half the mining rights in this sector. I could have you expelled with a single come call." Zara's smile was razor-sharp. "Funny you should mention that. You see, humans have this thing called the internet. We're really good at sharing information, and we've learned some interesting things about your family's mining operations. Something about using slave labor on restricted worlds, using child workers from refugee populations, the color drained from Brutok's rocky features. That information was supposed to be buried deeper than a core mine. See, here's the thing about humans," Zara continued, maintaining the painful hold. "We really, really don't like bullies. And when we don't like something, we tend to do something about it. Even if it's dangerous. Even if it's stupid. Even if we have no good reason except that it's the right thing to do." Around the cafeteria, other students were beginning to stir. The absolute nature of Brutok's dominance had been shattered, and the carefully maintained social order was crumbling. "I'm sorry," Brutok muttered, his voice barely audible. "Louder," Zara said cheerfully. "And to her, not me, asterisk." "I'm sorry, Lyrics," Brutok shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Zara released him and stepped back, offering her hand to help him up. The gesture was so typically human that several anthropology students began taking notes immediately. "No hard feelings," she said as Brutok struggled to his feet. "But if I ever see you bothering her, or anyone else for that matter, we're going to have another conversation. And next time, I might not be in such a good mood." The aftermath is Brutok and his humiliated gang skulked away. The cafeteria slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. But they were different now. Hushed, excited. The natural order had been challenged and found wanting. Zara walked over to where Lyrics still sat. The Catherian's scales slowly returning to their natural iridescent hue. She was staring at the human with something approaching. "Or you hungry?" Zara asked, offering her own untouched meal. "I was going to get seconds anyway." "Why?" Lyrics whispered, her voice like wind chimes. "Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know?" Zara shrugged, the gesture so quintessentially human that it would become a subject of study in xenocultural classes for years. "Where I come from, nobody eats off the floor. Not while I can do something about it." From across the cafeteria, other students began to approach, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. A young WISP student returned Zara's juice with something approaching reverence. A group of collectors clicked their appreciation in their native language. Even some of the wealthier students, those who had stayed silent out of self-preservation rather than cruelty, came forward to introduce themselves. But it was Captain Torres who provided the moment's most significant observation. The grizzled human instructor had watched the entire confrontation from the doorway, and now he approached with the measured stride of a career military officer. "Interesting technique, Chen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat. "Mind if I ask where you learned it?" "My grandmother," Zara replied. "She always said that if you're going to fight, you better fight to win." Torres nodded approvingly. "Wise woman. Your grandmother, military, Marine Corps, 3 tours on Kepler Station during the expansion wars." "Ah, Torres." Expression shifted to one of understanding. "That explains it. Tell me, what do you know about asymmetric warfare?" The question seemed casual, but Zara sensed deeper currents. "The idea that you don't have to be the biggest or strongest to win. You just have to be smarter about where and how you fight." "Exactly." Torres looked around the cafeteria, taking in the changed dynamic, the way students were now clustering around humans instead of avoiding them. "You've just given the entire academy a lesson in human military doctrine without firing a shot." As the day wore on and word spread throughout the station, the implications of what had happened began to sink in. Humanity had been the newest member of the galactic community, often overlooked or underestimated by the established powers. They had no great physical advantages, no ancient technologies, no vast industrial empires. What they had was something else entirely. They had the audacity to stand up when everyone else sat down. They had the stubborn refusal to accept that might made right. And most importantly, they had each other. The academy would never be quite the same. The old hierarchies based on strength and wealth were cracking, replaced by something more complex and ultimately more fair. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and it had all started with one human girl who refused to let another being eat off the floor. Asterisk. The human way of war. The ripple effect news of the cafeteria incident spread through Stellar Academy like wildfire through an oxygen-rich atmosphere. By the next morning, every student on the station had heard some version of the story. The details varied depending on who was telling it. But the core remained the same. A human had stood up to Brutok and won in the 3 days that followed. The social dynamics of the academy began to shift in ways that made the administration nervous and the student body electric with possibility. Lyrics, who had spent months as an invisible target, found herself surrounded by friends for the first time since arriving at the academy. Other scholarship students, previously isolated by their lack of family wealth, began sitting together at meals. The rigid hierarchy that had governed student life for decades was showing cracks, but Brutok was not finished. Humiliation was not something his species handled well, and his family's reputation demanded satisfaction. He had spent the last 3 days planning, recruiting, and preparing for what he saw as inevitable payback. Zara was aware of the gathering storm. She had noticed the hostile glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. The way Brutok's allies had begun moving in coordinated patterns around the academy. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "In war, the enemy gets a vote too. Always assume they're planning something, because they usually are." The gauntleted was Captain Torres who delivered the warning. He found Zara in the engineering lab where she spent most of her free time, working on a project that involved something he didn't quite understand, but which seemed to require an unusual amount of high-tensile wire and compact. "Electronics, Chen," he said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone delivering bad news. "We need to talk." Zara looked up from her work, immediately reading the tension in his posture. "How bad?" Brutox gathered a hunting party, 6 Gorvani, all from influential families. They're planning to corner you somewhere without security coverage, probably the lower maintenance levels, when tomorrow, during the scheduled maintenance blackout. They've been careful, but not careful enough. My contacts in station security picked up the chatter. Zara nodded, her mind already working through possibilities. The maintenance blackouts happened twice a week, shutting down non-essential systems, including security cameras in the lower levels. It was a perfect opportunity for the kind of violence that could be explained away as an unfortunate accident. 6-on-1, she mused, almost to herself. Brutox not taking any chances this time. Chen, Torres said quietly, these aren't academy bullies anymore. These are the sons of warlords and corporate executives. They're not looking to embarrass you. They're looking to put you in a medical pod for a long, long time. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering her options. She could report the threat to Academy administration, but Brutox's family connections made official intervention unlikely. She could try to avoid the confrontation entirely, but that would only delay the inevitable and make her look weak to every other potential bully on the station. Or she could do what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. She could get creative. Preparation, I'm going to need some help, Zara said finally. Torres raised an eyebrow. What kind of help? The kind that involves every other human student on this station, some basic principles of military tactics, and a really good understanding of how environmental systems work. Within 2 hours, Zara had assembled the Academy's entire human student population in one of the smaller lecture halls. There were only 12 of them total, making humanity one of the smallest represented species on the station. But as her grandmother used to say, it wasn't about the size of the dog in the fight. Marcus Webb, a 19-year-old from the Martian colonies studying xenobiology, leaned forward in his seat. So let me get this straight. You want us to take on 6 of the biggest, meanest aliens on the station in a fair fight? No, Zara replied, with a grin that would have made a shark proud. I want us to take them on in an unfair fight. One that's unfair in our favor. She activated the room's holographic projector, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the Academy's lower levels. Brutox thinks he's setting up an ambush. What he's actually doing is walking into a carefully prepared battlefield where every advantage belongs to us. Elena Basquez, studying tactical communications, studied the display with professional interest. You're talking about urban warfare principles, creating kill zones, controlling movement, limiting their advantages, while amplifying ours. Exactly. Brutox people are bigger and stronger, but they're also used to fighting in open spaces where they can use their reach and mass effectively. The maintenance tunnels are narrow, cramped, and full of environmental hazards they're not familiar with. David Park, the group's resident expert on station systems, began nodding as he understood the implications. You want to use the station itself as a weapon, among other things. David, how well do you know the atmospheric controls for the lower levels? Better than anyone except the chief engineer. Why? Zara's smile became positively predatory. Because we're going to teach Brutox gang why humans developed asymmetric warfare in the first place. The human network asterisk. What followed was a crash course in human military tactics taught by a bunch of teenagers to a bunch of other teenagers. But these weren't ordinary teenagers. They were the best and brightest humanity had to offer, selected for their intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving abilities. Marcus, despite his reservations, turned out to have an intuitive grasp of battlefield psychology. The key is to make them react instead of act. Keep them off balance, always responding to us instead of implementing their own plan. Elena's background in communications made her the natural choice for coordination. We'll need hand signals and coded phrases. Nothing electronic that they can intercept or jam. David's knowledge of the station's systems was encyclopedic. I can control lighting, atmospheric composition, even localize gravity in some sections. But we'll have to be careful not to create anything that could hurt innocent people. Sarah Kim, studying xenological medicine, raised a practical concern. What about injuries? If this goes wrong, people could get seriously hurt. That's why it's not going to go wrong, Zara said firmly. We plan for every contingency, we execute flawlessly, and we make sure that when it's over, nobody can say we were the aggressors. The arena, the maintenance level of Stellar Academy, was a maze of corridors, junction boxes, and environmental equipment. During normal operations, it buzzed with automated systems and the occasional maintenance worker. During the scheduled blackouts, it became a darkened labyrinth where sounds echoed strangely and shadows played tricks on the eyes. Brutok and his hunting party descended into this maze with confident arrogance. They had the numbers, they had the physical advantages, and they had the element of surprise. Or so they thought. What they actually had was a carefully orchestrated invitation into a trap that had been weeks in the planning. Zara crouched in a service crawlway 30 feet above the main corridor, watching through a ventilation grate as the 6 Gorvani moved in formation through the passageway below. They were being professional about it, she had to admit. Proper spacing, good sight lines, weapons held ready. If this had been a fair fight in an open space, she would have been in serious trouble, but fair fights were for sporting events. Not survival. She activated her CUM unit, whispering into the throat mic that Alina had rigged for silent operation. Contact. 6 targets moving down corridor C7 as predicted. All units, initiate Phase 1. Phase 1, disorientation, the first indication. Brutok's gang had that something was wrong was when the lights went out. Not the normal dimming that accompanied maintenance blackouts, but complete darkness that fell like a curtain across their world. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately. But David had been busy with the environmental controls for the past hour. Instead of the steady red glow that should have guided their way, the Gorvani found themselves in chaotic illumination that turned their familiar corridor into an alien landscape of shifting shadows and confused perspectives. "Stay together," Brutok growled, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow space. "It's just a power fluctuation." But it wasn't just the lights. The atmospheric processes began cycling in unusual patterns, creating pressure changes that made their inner ears struggle to maintain balance. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 30 seconds, then spiked back up, then dropped again. Nothing dangerous, but enough to keep their bodies in a constant state of physiological stress. And then came the sounds. Alina had positioned speakers throughout the maintenance level, carefully hidden in equipment, housings, and ventilation shafts. The sounds they produced weren't loud, but they were disturbing. Whispers in languages that didn't quite exist. Mechanical noises that suggested massive machinery moving just out of sight. Footsteps that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "This is wrong," one of Brutok's companions muttered, his voice tight with growing anxiety. "We should go back." "We go forward," Brutok commanded, but even his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The legendary Gorvani confidence was beginning to crack. Phase 2, harassment. The attacks began small. A loose panel falling from the ceiling to clatter loudly just behind the group. A brief electrical discharge that sparked and popped from an overloaded junction box. A section of flooring that gave way slightly under the weight of the largest Gorvani. Not enough to cause injury, but enough to create fear of what might be structurally unsound. Each incident was minor, explainable, possibly accidental. But they came in rapid succession, each one raising the stress level and making the group more jumpy, more prone to mistakes. Marcus struck from above, dropping a small smoke canister that filled the corridor with thick, harmless vapor that smelled vaguely of rotten eggs, as the Gorvani coughed and tried to wave away the smoke. Sarah activated a subsonic frequency generator that made them feel nauseous without knowing why. It's the humans, Brutok realized, his voice a mixture of rage and grudging respect. They're hunting us. He was right, of course, but understanding the trap and escaping it were two different things entirely. Phase 3, division. The corridor split into 3 directions ahead of them. In normal lighting, the choice would have been obvious. Take the main passage and stay together. But in the strobing emergency illumination, with smoke still lingering in the air and their nerves on edge, the decision seemed more complex. Elena's voice whispered from hidden speakers. So quiet it might have been imagination. Split up. Cover more ground. Find them faster. It was such an obviously bad tactical decision that none of them should have fallen for it. But humans understood psychology in ways that many other species didn't. The voice wasn't giving them orders. It was supposedly giving orders to the humans. The natural response was to do the opposite of what your enemy wanted. Gorvani went left, 2 went right, and Brutok continued forward with his remaining companion. It was exactly what Zara had hoped for, the art of individual combat. First pair found themselves in a dead-end corridor that shouldn't have existed according to the station schematics. David had been busy with more than just atmospheric controls, apparently. Temporary barriers had been erected, creating a maze where none should be as they turned to retreat. Marcus and Sarah struck from concealed positions, not with brute force, which would have been suicide, but with tactics refined over millennia of human warfare. Smoke grenades filled the narrow space with thick vapor. Sonic disruptors destroyed their equilibrium. And then, in the chaos, 2 humans with climbing gear and martial arts training did what humans had always done best. They adapted. The second pair fared no better. Elena and David had prepared their section of the maze with electromagnetic pulse devices that interfered with the Gorvani's cybernetic implants. Most galactic species had embraced technological augmentation, but humans remained stubbornly biological. In an environment designed to disrupt electronics, that became an advantage. The final confrontation, Bruck found himself alone with his last companion in a maintenance chamber that seemed larger than it should be. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the walls were lined with pipes and conduits that created 1,000 hiding places. The strobing lights made everything seem to move with malevolent life. Asterisk, show yourself, human. He roared, his voice echoing off the metal surfaces. Face me honorably. Zara's laugh came from everywhere and nowhere, amplified and distorted by the speaker system until it seemed like the station itself was mocking him, honorably. Her voice seemed to dance around the chamber. You brought 6 fighters to face 1. You planned to attack someone half your size in a place without witnesses. And you want to talk about honor. I am Gorvani, We are the strong. The weak serve the strong. This is the natural order. Funny thing about nature, Zara replied, and suddenly she was there, dropping from a ceiling conduit with the fluid grace of a predator. The dinosaurs thought they were the natural order too. The last stand. What followed was not a fight in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of why humans had become the galaxy's most feared warriors despite their physical limitations. Brutok swung with devastating force, his massive fists capable of pulverizing stone. But Zara wasn't where his fists went. She moved like water, flowing round his attacks, using his strength and momentum against him. When he charged, she sidestepped and sent him crashing into a wall. When he tried to grab her, she was already behind him, applying leverage to joints that weren't designed to bend that way. His companion tried to help, but found himself tangled in high tensile wire that Zara had strung throughout the chamber like a spider's web. The more he struggled, the more entangled he became. "You see," Zara said conversationally as she dodged another wild swing, "humans spent 100,000 years being hunted by things bigger and stronger than us. We learned to be smart about it." She produced a small device from her belt and activated it. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with a high-pitched whine that made the Gorvani clutch their heads in agony. Their hearing was more sensitive than humans, and the frequency was carefully calibrated to cause maximum discomfort without permanent damage. Asterisk. "We learned that you don't have to be the apex predator to survive. You just have to be more trouble than you're worth." Victory and understanding when station security arrived, summoned by reports of disturbances in the maintenance levels. They found 6 Gorvani students bound with maintenance wire and suffering from various non-permanent but highly uncomfortable effects. They also found 12 human students providing first aid and documenting everything with recording devices. Captain Torres arrived with the security team, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the scene. "Injuries?" he asked. "Minor bruises and wounded pride," Alina reported. "Nothing that won't heal completely." "Who started this?" Brutok, still groggy from the sonic attack, tried to speak but found himself at a disadvantage. Every human in the chamber had a recording device, and the evidence was clear. His group had descended to the maintenance levels armed and with clear intent to cause harm. The humans had defended themselves with non-lethal methods and had immediately provided medical assistance afterward. "I believe," Torres said carefully, "this is what human military doctrine calls proportional response to clear and present danger, the new order." The aftermath of what came to be known as the maintenance level incident rippled through Stellar Academy and beyond. The recordings made by the human students became required viewing in several xenomilitary academies, as examples of asymmetric tactics and psychological warfare. More importantly, the social structure of the academy underwent a fundamental shift. Brutok and his companions faced disciplinary action for their planned attack, while the humans received commendations for their restraint and tactical innovation. The message was clear. Strength without wisdom was no longer enough. Lyrics flourished in this new environment, her artistic talents finally given the recognition they deserved. She designed a memorial garden for the academy that incorporated elements from all 47 represented species, a symbol of unity in diversity that became a model for other institutions throughout the galaxy. Other bullies found themselves facing a new reality. The human students had established a precedent that would be remembered for generations. They didn't start fights, but they finished them. More importantly, they finished them in ways that left their opponents intact but thoroughly educated about the costs of aggression. Lessons learned in his final report to Academy administration. Captain Torres wrote, "The human students have demonstrated something that military theorists have long understood but civilian populations often forget. Warfare is not about strength. It is about will, intelligence, and the ability to adapt under pressure." These young people faced superior numbers and physical capabilities, but they possessed superior tactics, preparation, and most importantly, superior motivation. They were not fighting for dominance or personal gain. They were fighting for principle, for the idea that the strong should not prey upon the weak simply because they can. This is a lesson that extends far beyond Academy politics. As humanity takes its place in the galactic community, other species would do well to understand that we are not impressive because of our physical capabilities or our technological advantages. We are impressive because we will stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it is dangerous, and even when we have no good reason to do so except that it is right. The galaxy is still learning about humanity, but one lesson is becoming increasingly clear. We are the species that steps up when others step aside, even if all we have to work with is stubbornness, creativity, and an unshakable belief that everyone deserves to eat their meal off a plate instead of the floor. As Zara walked through the Academy corridors weeks later, she noticed the changes everywhere. Students from different species sat together at meals. Study groups formed across racial lines. The rigid hierarchies that had once seemed permanent were giving way to something more complex, more fair, and ultimately more human. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still prejudices, still conflicts. But there was also hope, and that made all the asterisk.